Welcome to Talent Talks, the podcast where your host, Dan Maisey, dives into hiring's ins and outs. Our goal is to reveal how to attract top talent. Through interviews with leaders in sports, media and entertainment, we explore job search and recruitment trends, offer interview tips and strategies to differentiate yourself and uncover their hiring insights. Whether you're prepping for an interview or interested in hiring trends, Talent Talks is your essential resource. Let's dive in. Today we welcome Jim Eyre to the podcast, the Chief Executive of British Equestrian. Jim brings a wealth of experience in strategic development and operations management from his diverse career spanning military service to sports administration. His military background, having served as a Lieutenant Colonel in the Household Cavalry, underpins his robust approach to leadership, risk management and operational planning. Having left the Army after 25 years, he transitioned to sports, where he's held significant roles. Firstly, as the Chief Operating Officer at Harlequins, where he honed his skills in commercial operations alongside getting to grips with the business side of high-performance sport. His stint as a project officer for England Rugby during the challenging COVID-19 period further showcases his ability and capability to handle crisis situations effectively. Now at British Equestrian, he continues to apply a strategic acumen to advance the organisation. With his wealth of experience in leadership and talent management through both his military training and now in the sports world, I can't wait to delve into his thoughts on recruitment and talent strategy within the competitive sports industry. Jim, welcome to Talent Talks.
Morning, Dan. Thank you. That makes me feel both old. Just old, actually.
Apologies. I always try and make people have a bit of a smile on their face after those introductions, but
It did.
It's sometimes you can't help that kind of thing. Right, let's get straight into this. I'm looking forward to this one. We ask this question, as you know, to every guest that comes on. What are your experiences of hiring and being hired, and do you have any lessons learned?
Good question. And I'm taking it sort of in the military, you have a organisation that looks after careers, and you're tapped on the shoulder every 2 years and then moved normally to a location and a job you didn't necessarily want to do. So it's very different. Whereas here, and actually as a person looking for jobs, I sort of liken it to fishing. You have to have so many lines in the water, and arguably working with many different companies to try and find the right job, the right time and the right fit. So yeah, I think you have to be, if you're looking for a job, you have to be really, really proactive. And when you come across a good company, that really helps a lot. So that's from the personal side of it. On the other side, I think you just need, you're recruiting at different levels. If you're recruiting for a CEO or a director, you probably outsource. If you're looking at a junior level, you're probably doing it through your own networks. And you've just got to keep the faith in a way.
Yeah, I think there's this is a really interesting way of ending it there, keeping the faith. You mentioned there around the military side of things. I don't want to kind of delve into that and the training and the leadership side of stuff that I know you went through. When you say you kind of get tapped on the shoulder and you basically have to go into a role or the next job that you don't necessarily want, how do you handle that? How do you approach that from going in and leading a team in necessarily a situation or a scenario that you weren't particularly keen to?
Yeah, I think in many ways, the variety of roles, and one changes job pretty much every 2 years in the military. Actually, it equips you really well, in terms of flexibility and learning. On the downside, it means that you don't have any consistency in those roles for the organizations or the projects that you're serving. So it's a double-edged sword, but I think it's part and parcel. And when I say you're tapped on the shoulder, you don't know where you're going. You can be the architect of your future by making sure you do the right networking, you set yourself up for the right job, but the needs of the service comes first, and so it's not always perfect for you or your family where you next move on to.
Yeah, and networking is obviously quite an important part of that, as you mentioned, and it's just as vital outside of the sport industry. And you kind of mentioned it as well when you were looking for junior roles, that actually your network is one of those key areas that you can delve into to find those candidates. When you'd made the decision that you're going to leave the Army, how did you start building that network? And ultimately, was it always going to be sports that you wanted to go into as well? Or were there other options? What were your thoughts on that side of things?
It's a really good question. For me, I had a blank canvas. I didn't know where I wanted to go. And having been fairly institutionalized it was a really good opportunity to get out and about and meet people. And so you started off with the network. We all have our LinkedIn, but actually it's using that LinkedIn, activating it. And on the whole, your network will give you time over coffee, various meetings, which is all part of your education. And therefore you can build a picture of where you do want to go or where you don't want to go. But actually all of that arms you with better information of the landscape that's out there. So yeah, I think the network is the network, however you like to call it, sounds like a sort of sinister organization, but it's really important to activate it. And most people on it will give you the time, and it's really valuable.
Yeah, I think there is a real challenge, I think, certainly with people that are either transitioning into sport or junior people coming in, where you feel like, I don't have the network, I don't have the contacts, but actually certainly I found, and this is the advice I give when I speak to people as well, is it's with LinkedIn now, it's easy to build an inverted commas network, but you've got to put the effort in to make that network worthwhile, rather than just have lots of people that are there and don't really do anything. But what I think is paramount is actually having the confidence to just send messages, reach out to people and ask for that talk, or ask for that advice, or ask for that coffee. Because actually, as you said, people would be surprised at the amount of time that most people, and I caveat that being rather a generalized statement, but most people would give to you to give that advice. And I think that's something that I'm not sure people, certainly those that are outside the sports industry or those that are trying to get in, or junior levels, really understand that most people are perfectly happy once they've got time. And if there's a real requirement, and you're very clear as to what you're looking for from that coffee and that meeting and that advice, that actually they're more than happy to give it. A lot of people just like talking about themselves, let's be honest.
I think it's really true. I think sometimes people are flattered to have that approach. Can I tap you for a bit of advice or guidance? And so people will give you the time because they've been in the same situation themselves back in the day and would like to think people would do it for them. And then the piece of advice that I had was, it's a 25-minute meeting or whatever, is that you'd like to leave that meeting with 2 further contacts. So could you introduce me to so-and-so and so-and-so? And that way your own network builds, and actually you can take it down the path, the direction you want to go.
Yeah, I love that. And it also, it means that as somebody that is requested the meeting as well, you're showing your proactivity and understanding what that network of the person you want to talk to is like as well, and actually doing a bit of work and a bit of research into who they are, who their connections are, where their skill set is. And I think I've said this on previous pods around hiring in general, and actually the ease of applications now with things like LinkedIn Easy Apply. I think you're then starting to get a bit of a lack of true research and true in-depth kind of understanding of what you're applying for. And that's where you get kind of 200-300 applicants for a job, that half of which are entirely pointless. And it relates back to actually something you mentioned in your first answer, I was going to touch on as well, in terms of being proactive and looking for a role, and being proactive and looking for an organization you want to join. Something said around, once you've found that company, you do what you need to do in order to try and, I suppose, get noticed by them, get into that company. What have you done in the past, when you've kind of obviously transitioned out from the army and looking at whether that's Quins or England Rugby or where you are now at British Equestrian? How have you promoted yourself, as it were, in making sure that you're kind of you are the right person to come into the organisation?
Ooh, I'm not sure. It's sort of, whether it's a conscious thing or not, I'm always wary of people with sort of naked ambition. So I think it's more about just doing a good job, trying to do a good job, and as ever, keep a calm head in a crisis, trying to have a sense of humour, trying to keep everyone in the same direction. So I don't think, personally, I don't do anything like that consciously. I think you just try and be, whatever it is, a good person, get shit done. I think that's probably the best way. But equally, there are people who are very focused, very ambitious and keen, and you see them moving through organizations. And there are some brilliantly talented people that can do that as well. But I always tend to shy away from people who are sort of have that raw ambition, because that unsettles the normal group, the normal team.
It's interesting, and Is that, I suppose, when you're hiring and when you're looking to bring people into the organisations that you've worked for, is that something that you can flag in an interview process, or is that something that you kind of start to realise once the candidate or the new starter at the time has joined the company? Is that something that, how easy is that to recognise in somebody?
I think it's something that most people, everyone's ambitious in their own way. It's just how that, what level of priority and how exposed that is. And I think you probably can get it out of a good interview process. And it would be very clear. It'd be very clear if they've got sharp elbows in the organisation. If you haven't identified that, ambition's a good thing, but not at the detriment to the organisation.
100%, and that comes down ultimately as well to a values play. And does that person have the right values that will enhance the organisation, not just themselves? And I think that's quite a key piece and a huge theme that's come out from a podcast, as you can probably imagine, is the values
Absolutely
kind of topic. And so how important is that to you when you're hiring from a skill versus values based approach, especially when you've come from a background in the military that is so heavily kind of value and culture led as much as it is skill led?
Yes, I think it's and I sort of reflecting on that point, the whole culture requirement before this interview. I think the qualifications and experience gets a candidate to the door. I think culture is, culture and personality is absolutely critical at the interview. I think it's probably it is more important than the experience and the qualifications of an individual. As I say, that gets them to the table, that gets them to the interview, but no further. And you can't sort of stereotype the fit, because you need diversity and you need a range of personalities in an organisation, but they've got to be the right cultural fit. Otherwise, you will pay for it in the long run. It's not good for the organisation. It's not necessarily good for the individual either, and you'll end up doing a lot more work trying to repair that damage.
Yeah, I think there's a real understanding that's coming through from obviously talking to you, but also other podcasts as well. Again, where if there is an issue in a value and a culture piece, then actually it isn't just from one side; it is from both sides. And whilst if something doesn't work out, the person that has to leave the organisation may, at least at the beginning, feel a little bit aggrieved. Actually, in the long run, there is a realisation that just wasn't the right place for me. It's that I wasn't going to progress, I wasn't going to add value, and I wasn't going to kind of help the organisation or myself. And I think, if people really kind of start to reflect on past experiences and places where they thought actually it hasn't really worked out, I think realistically the majority of that time has been the culture around, rather than the fact they haven't got the skills. Because as you said, you wouldn't get the job fundamentally if you don't have the skill set, or if you don't have the majority of the skill set.
Yeah.
Really,
there is a risk, though, that going back to the diversity piece, and I mean that in the whole holistic term of it, you may recruit someone because you think this person is an energizer, or this person is really going to shake the team up. This person is not of the same. And you want that to stimulate and energize the organization, but you might get that wrong. You might overstep it. And there's the great book, The First 90 Days, is that, you might have the perfect liver transplant, but the host isn't ready to accept it. And sometimes that's probably a good way of explaining it. If the liver gets rejected, the body wasn't ready for it. So there's a balance there. Sometimes you have to take a few punts just to keep the organization moving forward, but sometimes that doesn't come off.
So I think there's a fine line between getting the right diverse characters in and making sure there's diversity of thought and upsetting the apple cart in terms of the kind of cultural piece. But I do think that culture shouldn't be homogenized. It should be wide enough to go, you know what, this is the culture, these are the values of the company, but within that cultural side of things, we are able to have as wide a kind of diversity of thought and as wide a character as possible. And I think, exposure to anyone listening here, we work together at Quins, And I do think whilst there was definitely a certain type of person that worked there at the time, but I do think within that there was also a lot of kind of diversity around the thought processes of what we were trying to do. And certainly kind of from a challenge, there were people there that weren't afraid to challenge. And I think that's where there needs to be a bit of balance, because I'm all for the cultural side of things, but we need to make sure that we haven't got people in that are just going to say yes to us all the time and that are going to challenge the status quo, because ultimately that's the way that you proceed and that's the way that you improve.
Yeah, I totally agree. And reflecting again on Quins, I think we had a good range of people and plenty who didn't necessarily follow rugby, and that diversity of thought. And actually also it's about having the safe space and freedom to be able to offer your opinions. I think that's really valuable. So yeah, you're right. Actually, the organisation needs to have the right culture itself. And that's part of the interview process. It is a two-way action. And the applicant may walk away from the interview and go, I'm not quite sure I like the nature of this organisation. So both sides are on show.
So I think we're seeing more and more the power shift, as it were. But I think organisations are starting now to realise a little bit more that they don't have all of the power in that relationship. Applicants are going to places that they feel like they fit in better from a culture and a value perspective, but also that offer them what they need and what they want. And actually, as you say, they are ones now kind of being a little bit more forthright in their needs and requirements first. And that's potentially, I work better in certain situations. I work better, I do a lot more work in afternoon and evenings, and so how can I kind of be flexible around that? And I think organisations that are slightly less open to those types of things potentially are going to find that they're not going to have as many people wanting to join them going forward. You mentioned earlier around how you're approaching recruitment from a kind of obviously junior and network side of things. We've touched on that, but in terms of that senior hire and the outsourcing of that, what's your experience of bringing agents, recruitment agencies, whoever you've used into that process, and especially in terms of getting across what you're looking for, but getting across what the applicant needs to match in terms of those values, cultures, and the skill. Like I said, we said earlier, the skill basis is the kind of the easy part, but the culture and values side of things, how do you get that across to a recruiter or recruitment agency to make sure they're finding the right people to fit?
I think there's a bit of a partnership relationship there, that if you just go to an organisation you haven't worked with before, you have to do the whole introduction and sort of dance to make sure that they are reflecting what you're after. But if you build up that relationship with a recruitment company, then after a while, they're almost second guessing you. They can see where your holes are, what type of person you have. But again, that's sort of that personal relationship. Now, equally, they might be a year out and not reflecting where you're at the time. But I think having a good relationship with a recruitment company probably pays dividends.
Yeah, I think it's understanding what the organizational goals are and how the talent strategy fits into that, and how people that are needed within the organization can truly add value to that organization, not just come in and do a job. It's about how you can drive it forward and go from where we are now to 6 to 12 to 18 months. And I think, again, it's a bit more of that longer term view, which I appreciate. And I'm sure you'll say this as well, but I appreciate that takes time for an organization and for leaders in an organization to work out and to really kind of put into practice. And ultimately, hopefully, that's where a good recruitment agency or talent advisory service, or whatever you want to call it, would help and add value in that sense, because you're just taking that task and that time off the leader's hands in order to make sure that they can work in together and, as you say, work as a partnership rather than as a one-off.
Yeah, and you all want people who, as they say, are after your job. You all want to recruit people that you can see will move upwards within an organisation. And so when you do find those people, or recruitment agencies find those people, it's good to have that relationship with them to make sure that they come to you first, because that that level of quality is a sought after and not necessarily a common quality.
No, I completely agree. Completely agree. And Jim, I'm conscious of time. We are getting towards the end of the kind of time limit that we set ourselves, and I want to make sure that we've got a good amount of time to crack onto our 3 quickfire questions. Although I say they're quickfire, and I don't think they've ever been quickfire, but we'll try our best. But right, we ask these, as you know, to every single guest that comes on. So we'll start with the first one. What has been your most frustrating thing about recruitment?
Having to do it myself, learning the ropes, but conversely, actually, it's a huge opportunity. And if you take the positive, it's always depressing when you have to go to a recruitment agency, either as an employer or searching for a job. But actually, there's a whole host of opportunities there. So it is quite exciting as much as being frustrating.
Yeah, that's a good answer. These are why it's not quick fire, because I always want to dig into the answers. But just very quickly, how have you taught yourself on that side of things?
How have I taught myself?
Yeah, you mentioned there around kind of having to do it yourself and having to teach yourself how to do it. How have you gone about doing that?
Well, and throughout this conversation, we talked about LinkedIn, we talked about agencies, but the personal meetings hone your skills the whole time, and you're learning, whether it's cliches, but it's you're understanding different organizations and businesses, building up your understanding, but also that kind of, let's say, unseen skill of interviewing and coming across well, which actually, if you haven't done it for a while, it's a skill that you need to hone so that when you get to the interview that you really want to nail, actually you can put your best person forward.
Right, back to the quick fire questions. Sorry, we digressed. Who, and you don't have to name them, but you're more than welcome to, who has been your best hire and why?
So a recent hire has been a very good, and you know when very quickly you hand over that trust piece. Obviously, when you have a new hire, you have to keep on top. You have to reassure and guide and help and all that, and you keep close to that person. But that once that demonstration of trust and capability, and that they're thinking that they're in your mind, they are going above and beyond, then it's really satisfying. It's really good. It goes back to that opportunity. Every new hire is an opportunity for success.
Yeah, that's a great way to end that question. And the final one, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this. What is one thing that you would change about the recruitment world?
I think, and I'm being general, more honesty, and because it's a stressful time for the candidate, for the applicant, and more honesty, more clarity, less ghosting when things go wrong, because actually very unlikely to get your first job, but if you're being educated along the way and guided by the experts, then that's much more constructive and helpful.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think it's about that transparency, but it's the learning curve, and it's an emotional journey for a candidate to go through, and the more one can take out of that journey and put it into practice going forward, the better it will be. So I completely agree with that as well. Look, Jim, it's been fantastic. I think we could talk for a lot longer, but it's been really good to have you on the pod. I think your experience and your tips there throughout have been that people will take a lot from them. So thanks again for taking the time, and thanks again for coming on Talent Talks.
Thanks, Dan. No, thank you, Dan, and good luck with Peak 72. Exciting times. Thank you.